A very warm welcome to all of you here tonight in the Balie. My name is Juri Albrecht, I'm director of the Balie. I will try to conduct this conversation tonight. Yes, please do come in, there's more room. I'm taking over from Larissa Bimond, Balie editor, who couldn't be here tonight, but who made this program. And I'm very happy that you're here, and I'm also very happy that people at home watching on the internet, maybe even worldwide, this conversation. I think we're having a groundbreaking conversation, possibly, from the Tsars to Putin, the colonial legacy of Russia. And the big question is, how do age-old imperial myths still influence Russian politics, culture, and the mindset of its citizens? And we're talking about a colonial empire which has been hiding in plain sight for a long time. And I'm very happy that you're willing to conduct this conversation with us. Very warm welcome to the speakers here. It's a thing which has been discussed in the West sometimes, the decolonization of the Western empires. Maybe not enough, but there has been a start. But a conversation in the West about the imperialist and colonial legacy of Russia, the Russian Empire, Tsarist Empire, has been hardly started. So I'm very happy that we can try to make some inroads in this conversation here tonight. And I think it's a very topical and important topic, because I think without this conversation, it's almost impossible to understand what is happening in large parts of the world and wars being fought in Ukraine, for instance, and in other parts. So again, important conversation. We're very, very happy that we're doing this together with Free Russia NL, and I'd like to give the floor first to Ira Heuvelman, dedicated volunteer with Free Russia.nl and our active partner in this evening. Warm welcome to you as well, actively supporting human rights and democratic movements in Russia. And she worked closely with Russian civil society organizations, and she will say a few words for introduction. Ira Heuvelman, the floor is yours. I give you the microphone, who's over there. Yeah.
Thank you. Goedenavond allemaal. Good evening. And first of all, I would like to thank you, the audience, for being here. We were scheduled in the salon first, but we were transferred here to Grote Zaal, and that really means a lot to us, to volunteers, to a very small group of volunteers who helped to organize this evening and this discussion. Thank you to Balie, and thank you the speakers, and especially a great thank for trusting us in this conversation and in this evening. First of all, I will start with a very simple statement. We are gathered here during a time of war. Ukrainian cities, Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa, are being bombed right now. Russian drones are flying across Europe. So why to discuss this abstract topic of Russian imperialism? I personally came a long way to realize that this is not such an abstract topic. It is only because of the strength and of the courage of Ukrainian people who are fighting Russian imperialism, Russian empire at the front. Every day we are able to be here and to have this discussion just in peace. It was also said here in the Balie by Maxim Eristavi a couple of months ago. This is a Ukrainian journalist. If you don't know his book, please find it and read it. It's a very, very important book. And reading books is important. Attending conferences, academical conferences is important. But the most important thing is to listen to the authentic voices. And that is what we are going to do here tonight. Listening to the authentic voices of the people and listening to the facts. For me, it's also not an abstract topic. I grew up with it. I witnessed Russian imperialism almost every single day during my life in Russia. And still, I thought it's not a time for this conversation, not during the war. But gradually, I began to see what causes what and what is the reason of the violence of today. I began to see how myths and history are forming the violence. I spoke with people, I listened, and I tried to understand. This is what brought me here tonight. I hope this evening will also help you to draw your own conclusions about the war and about the situation in the occupied territories, also in Ukraine. Because despite the image of Russia as a mono-ethnic, monocultural state, it is in fact a home to many ethnic groups, and most of them are brought into the state through conquest, annexation, and Russification. Though today, at this moment, more than 25 million not Russian Russians live under the pressure of assimilation and structural discrimination. This is why we are here tonight at the Balie. We want to listen, to learn, and to confront the roots and the psychology of the Russian imperialism. It is a difficult and uncomfortable topic, even in the democratical circles, in the circles of the Russian opposition. It's rarely addressed. Many, many times I've heard, it's too dangerous. It's too complicated. But what is dangerous? If criticism touches us personally, it's difficult. And this is also a sign of an imperial thinking. That idea that a country with a great culture, the biggest in the world, can be questioned. Also, propaganda fuels the fear that Russia might fall apart into many smaller Russias, supposedly more dangerous than the one that we know now. But the only way forward is the change. Without change, the circle repeats, and very often in worse forms. Any real change starts with recognition. Only by naming and understanding imperialism, seeing it, being aware of it, can we do something about it. Hiding is not an option anymore. It will never bring the beautiful Russia of the future some may dream of. I don't know if that dream will ever come true, but I know that the only way even to begin is not dreaming, but listening to authentic voices and to asking questions. And that is what you can do tonight at the Balie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ira Heuvelman, for this introduction and for cooperation in this evening. Now, without much further ado, I think it's about time to introduce the three speakers of tonight, and I'm very happy to introduce you. I'd like to start with, on my right side, Laila Latipova, Tatar journalist and political analyst from Bashkortostan, if I'm not mistaken. And she is a special correspondent with the Moscow Times, where she leads the outlet's trailblazing English language coverage of Russia's ethnic republics and regions. Some of them are regions, some of them are republics. We will dive into that a little bit later. Her pioneering work on Russia, indigenous and minoritized communities was published by other notable outlets, including the London School of Economics, Foreign Policy, Medusa. In addition to journalism, Laila has over a decade of research experience on applied nonviolent resistance in Russia, Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the Balkans. Welcome, very warm welcome to you. To my left side, Durdana Kudaibergen, originally from Pakistan, in an autonomous region in Uzbekistan, and the north of Uzbekistan, an activist for environmental, women and minority rights. You work as an advisor for European Commission programs and volunteers with the Actiefonds here in Amsterdam. And as a post-Soviet region specialist, you function in many functions, but and Durdana also has an experience across Central Asia and Eastern Europe, including roles in Bankwatch, the Global Green Grants Fund, and Médecins Sans Frontières. Thank you very much for joining us. And over here, a very warm welcome to Vladimir Son of Korea, or Saram, a Korean, you might say, born in Central Asia. A queer Asian from the Russian Federation. You dedicated your activism to improving Asian representation in the Russian-speaking LGBTQ+ community, and especially in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Vladimir Son is the founder of Invisible Rainbow, a project spotlighting stories from the LGBTQ+ community from the post-Soviet space, and a volunteer of Nomad Indigenous Collective. So, warm welcome to you as well. Wonderful to have all of you here. Just make sure that you do speak in the microphone if we are starting our conversation. Maybe I'd like to start off, if I may, Laila Latipova, with you for maybe to map the topic. This is a conversation about Russian colonialism and many other aspects of that. But maybe the first question to just put it upfront out there. Hiding in plain sight, an empire which came from the Tsars, which is ages old, looks a lot like the Victorian English colonial empire, maybe a little bit like the Dutch, but I think the comparison with the English is very, very apt. And how come in the first place that this colonial empire managed to sort of cloak itself as no such thing, as a nation state for the Russians and some others?
Ready with a hard question, an existential one. I think you've mentioned the British Empire, and I think it's really interesting because we rarely spoke about Russia as an empire before the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And Ira mentioned that in her opening speech, it was really thanks to Ukrainian politicians, Ukrainian activists. Is it working? Yeah,
I think it's working.
And ordinary citizens too, who really started talking about Russian colonialism. And I remember at the outset of the invasion, I was at an event similar to this at University College London, actually. I think it was one of the first times we started saying, oh, why Russia is an empire, how did that happen, etc. And one of the questions from the audience was, more than an argument, it was that you cannot call Russia an empire because empires expand, beyond the sea. And if it's a landmass, it is not an empire, which may be one of the reasons, why Russian colonial project is absolutely ingenious. For lack of a better word, it's the longest surviving empire. And when I say, the longest surviving empire, I'm an ethnic Tatar, and we, in a couple of weeks, we will hold yearly commemoration day of 12th October. That's our day of remembrance, and that's the capture of Kazan by Ivan the Terrible. That starts the history of colonization for us.
The Russians are Ivan the Terrible.
Yes, which was in 1552. I think that date, every Tatar knows that date. There are a lot of songs, very ingenious, also rap compositions about that. We all know when it started. To you it might seem like a historical fact, but to most people in Russia, what I'm saying right now is a source of huge controversy. The reason being, I'll dive into a personal example because I think it would be easier to grasp. A couple of years ago, I participated in a project called The Empire of Violence. Was organized by Feminist Anti-War Resistance. That's a very big anti-war feminist collective that functions within Russia and in the diaspora. And the project was fairly, innocent and simple as it might seem. It spotlighted several indigenous women, me being among them, and we recalled, historical events of Russian colonization, colonial violence that happened to our peoples. So when my video came out, and it's me talking about the conquest of Kazan, but also talking about the Day of Remembrance that was introduced by the Tatar government in the 1990s. That's when Tatarstan was trying to become independent. It actually held a referendum when majority of population voted for independence of Tatarstan. And you know, I basically said how today that the commemoration is banned in Russia. You're prohibited to hold that. Instead, what happens on 12th of October is a Russian Orthodox Church does a procession through Kazan celebrating that they conquered the city.
Still every October? Still this year? October?
Absolutely, absolutely. The counter-narrative is alive. So when that video aired, and you know, I'm an independent journalist covering Russia. I'm a woman. I'm used to having Kremlin trolls, you know, all over me saying that I'm spreading Kremlin propaganda, how, you know, the Moscow Times is an arm of NATO and blah, 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 all of these very familiar narratives. But what happened with that video is it went viral, but I was attacked not only by the Kremlin and its trolls, but also by what would you call, you know, mainstream Russian opposition. And people were saying you are, you know, inciting divisions. You shouldn't be posting that. They also started saying, well, if you remember that, then we will start remembering Tatar-Mongol Empire and how Russians suffered under it. Historical disclaimer, Tatars have nothing to do with the Tatar-Mongol Empire. We also kind of suffered under it.
Just to get the record straight.
Yeah, just to get the record straight here, and you know, this historical misunderstanding. So this is how controversial Russian colonialism is, and this is how absent it is from any kind of discussion and, you know, let alone official historical narratives that Russia propagates and that most of the people in Russia have been learning.
So you're describing both inside Russia and outside Russia.
Absolutely.
There's sort of hardly any discourse on it. Yeah. And maybe even harder to discuss it within Russia, but that's maybe not so surprising then to the outside. But on the outside, there's hardly any start with that conversation as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, we can talk about the Russian political opposition, but there is no, at least right now, willingness, you know, to acknowledge the imperial past, unfortunately.
I see both of you sort of nodding in understanding, sort of experiencing, that's how I interpret it, experiencing sort of the same, having had the same experiences. Is that correct? Is that...
Yes, that's right. So, first of all, I want to highlight the speech of Yulia Navalny in Slovenia. I'm not sure if some of you guys speak Russian, but I do. So
can I just take a small poll?
Yeah.
That's a good idea, actually. If we look in the audience, that's interesting, actually. How many of you do speak or read Russian? Well, that's impressive. Yeah.
So
That's impressive. Yeah, interesting. And how many of you are Russian? Okay, that's a difference, of course. We're discussing at the moment. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's interesting to know from each other.
So yes, in Slovenia she gave a speech. And
Yulia Navalny.
Yeah, and it was in Russian. And when the Navalny's team translated everything to English, they cut the most important part for me personally, because I support the colonial movement in context of Russian Federation. So she said that...
The decolonial movement.
Yeah, decolonial, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Just to be clear.
And so she said that, and to people who support the colonial movement, I would like to say that we are going to find you, and you're going to answer for the willingness and the desire to separate my country to the pieces. Is that correct?
think more or less, yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't
Almost
Yeah.
verbatim.
okay. It wasn't like exactly the quotation, but anyway, the meaning was that, and I was really impressed that during the translation, this part was missing into English. I mean, and I was like, why? I mean, if you stand by this position, you're supposed to be open about it, but no. So for me, it was this one, and then I also questioned.
For you, sorry, you said for me it was this one. What do you mean with that? This speech?
Yeah, so this speech, it was like, all right, I'm not gonna, probably not gonna work with the Russian opposition, mainstream opposition, because it's kind of like weird. They don't need to find me. I'm open and can answer for anything.
Were you, knowing sort of the history of Russian imperialism, were you surprised by that speech? Was it for you a shock, or was it?
No, actually, I wasn't. So for me, it was like, why? I mean, for me, it was clear why. What is the cause of these words? First of all, her husband was a nationalist, and he was white supremacist. Let's put it this way. And after the war, when the decolonial movement started to speak about it and questioning that thing, Navalny's teams tried to give the counter-argument that, you know, it was a long time ago. It was in 2014, right? It's like from 7 to 14, probably, or maybe less, like for 2007, and then until 2012, he was participating in Russian imperialist marches. And yeah, Navalny team was trying to explain that it was long ago and he is not like that any longer while he was in prison. Or another thing they were communicating or trying to is that he's in prison and you're not supposed to talk badly about the person who is in prison and he got back to Russia actually to save us. So either shut up or just don't say bad things about Navalny. So it was kind of like crazy for me, actually. And when I started to question someone from Navalny team in Twitter, I guess it wasn't X, it was Twitter back then. Yeah, I asked the question regarding one of their members' reaction, because he was reacting really aggressively on the video to some question from the lady. She was from Republic of Tuva, if I remember well. So she was asking him about imperial pasts, and he was just, you know, I'm not gonna answer this question right now, and if you want to talk, we can talk like outside or something like that. I don't remember exactly how it was, but I remember that once I've seen this video, I was like questioning him, and so I decided to go to Twitter because he was public back then, and I decided just to ask, why wouldn't you speak openly? Like if someone was want to ask you something and you disagree with their position, or you're just not aware about their position, like you still can try to hear the person and then give them sincere answer. But no, he didn't answer me, to be honest. So he just blocked me.
It's an illustration on how deep this
division is.
This division still runs, even in
and after
even
that
in the opposition.
Yes, and after that, Navalny's supporter actually came to my account and started to write some bad comments, let's say, and I actually incidentally found the post from someone from Navalny team, actually like screenshot of my question, and then or some description, really like bad description, saying that oh, you know, these people are bots and stuff. They are being paid by Kremlin just to bring more division into Russian anti-war opposition or something like that. And it was like really funny because I've never been paid by anyone.
Kremlin. No.
Yeah. No, in general, by anyone for my position. So it's just, yeah, funny.
Okay.
Where's my money?
Durdana,
Yeah.
if we continue this, sort of, it runs deep. Historically, in different regions, still a march in October in Kazan. It runs deep in the opposition, even. Maybe to you, if we delve a little bit deeper into it, is this, and from your personal experience maybe as well, where would we have to start with this whole colonial endeavor, the Russian colonial endeavor? If we take a step back, how long historically speaking, what period are we talking about?
We should really go back then. Thank you. It's a great question, I think. We should understand the narratives of Russian imperialism. As Leila said, it's very tricky. It's not like open like British imperialism or other like or French or even Dutch colonialism. I would like to speak from Central Asian point of view. As you guys heard, I'm from Karakalpakstan. It's a region of RLC disaster, which was done by Soviet government. It was man-made disaster first in entire world, because cotton monoculture was more important than the lives, than the air, than the water, than the biodiversity. Everything is gone, and poverty is, and tuberculosis levels is insane. So after 35 years, we are still feeling there, like my people. And if I go back to Russian imperialism, I would like to quote maybe a little bit from political theory. It's like why Russians, why these Tsars came to Central Asia. Actually, they fought with English queen at that time for this. We had several kingdoms there, like Kazakh kingdom, Bukhara kingdom. Different part of the country was divided because it's state, but it was quite rich region because of Silk Road, and very rich in natural resources still. Kazakhstan in oil, Uzbekistan in gas. So their mission was civilizing us, so bringing education, train roads to backward nations, and forced us to be only depending on monocultures, on the agriculture, and of course, silencing, sending to Gulag was normal. Even in my family, it happened. And another myth, I think, which I think in personal, it's which Russian imperialism always used, which used also to start the war several years ago against Ukraine. It was always the myths of one people. Belarus, Russians, Ukrainians are one people. We have this great Rus, which happened, I don't know how many centuries ago. This also taught at the school, which makes Ukrainian sovereignty not a question, but not a choice, but as a rebellion act against Russia. This narrative Putin used all the time. It always was used in Soviet times, and always was there was always hierarchy in this understanding. So white people like Belarus, Ukrainians, and Russians, the first place, Central Asians, Caucasians, other ethnicities which always lived in the territory of Russian Federation, current Russian Federation, were considered second people. Even considering their own lands, their own natural resources, because everything should be done for Moscow. And this mindset still stays in Russian Federation nowadays. Still abused, still used, still nobody. And the third narrative, which I think it's a protector of comrades, that means protecting Russian people, protecting Russian great culture, protecting Russian language speaker, which was one excuse to start attack on Donbass, was taking back Crimea. So that narratives put, of course, today I would like to focus more. I am not ethnicity from Russian Federation. I am Central Asian. I would like to focus more working immigrants from Central Asia. It's particularly from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, because Kazakhstan still accepted, because they speak better Russian. In Russian media, they are different description. And these narratives, which was put in the school books, make xenophobia, discrimination easily and socially acceptable against Central Asians in modern Russia. Because that narrative, we are second people, we are second sort of people, we are backwards, we don't understand, that narrative still stays in Putin's government. And yeah, this justifies their starting war against Ukraine or Georgia, which happened not more than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, yeah. And yeah, colonization of Central Asia happened of course, by force. One of the examples I recently read, because, yeah, I'm quite young. I was born after Soviet Union collapse. But, like, for example, when they came to Central Asia, it was quite Muslim countries, and women were wearing paranja, totally closed in some parts of region, not every part. There was many different kingdoms there. How they modernized women by taking out their clothings, burning them in the streets, without thinking what will happen with that woman afterwards. Because that woman will be after killed, stoned by their own families. So zero sensitivity to the traditions of religion.
This is partly a colonialist movement from the Russian Empire outside the borders of what's nowadays Russia, the Russian Federation of today, but continued by the Soviet Union, of course, started by the Tsars with Ivan the Terrible and those, but still in the 19th century, and very much in the 19th century. But there's also, this is sort of within the discourse where you could say, well, it's a foreign country now, it's Kazakhstan, it's Tajikistan, but within the Russian state we have nowadays, there are many autonomous regions and republics, which you could sort of describe in the same way, isn't it? Sort of being subjugated inside a country, but still inside a colonial setting.
I'm armed with the map. I always carry a map. If
you
read me on Moscow Times, you will see I always have a map there. It's essential.
So could you explain a little bit
absolutely.
that whole concept of, because you could think that, you know, within Russia it's all Russian.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Dardana and I were just talking how we have so many similarities. And we were joking that it's going to be a Central Asian table and I'm going to be sitting here. But in fact, there were so many. Tatarstan was supposed to be an independent state today. When Central Asian countries were declaring their independence in the 1990s, we also voted for independence. But the war in Chechnya started.
Was there a referendum?
There was a referendum.
Yep.
It had international observers. 60+% of the population voted. It was a very peculiar wording. They voted for sovereignty. And Tatarstan did not sign the federation agreement with Russia. It was the last one to do that. In fact, until 2022, the relationship between Moscow and Tatarstan was governed by a separate agreement. So there was these vestiges of autonomy, of attempt at independence, they existed until very recently. So Tatarstan had president, it had embassies, it still actually has a few around the world. Like in Turkey, it has, they call it like a special diplomatic mission, now it's embassy for all means and purposes. It's kind of who managed to get away from the empire in the 1990s. We were not so lucky because we are landlocked.
Who managed to get away at this brief period where Soviet Union
absolutely.
fell
Central
apart.
Asia managed. We're very jealous of that. But because so in this map you can see 21 ethnic republics in Russia, 3 autonomous districts. So ethnic republics, for all means and purposes, for those not familiar with them, they are states, within their own rights. In the 1990s, they adopted constitutions. A lot declared independence as Tatarstan. Then they signed federal agreement with Russia, joining the federation, which was supposed to be, an equal partnership, which never happened. What stalled this, development into equal partnership was, of course, Russian aggression and the brutal way in which Russian colonialism manifests, and it was the war in Chechnya, which, I think that's something the world ignored. And Russia really very cleverly utilized this narrative of the war against terror that would follow, in the Second Chechen War to pacify, including, European back then allies, whom Putin was trying to make into allies. No one thought twice that, Chechnya needs to be bombed, that people there for some reason have no right at being independent. But, to indigenous people and to indigenous people who live in the republics, this is a right guaranteed by both the local constitutions and international law. I do want to note why I use the term indigenous, because I think it's important.
Yeah, because why don't you use minorities or something like that?
I think the term minority, we did not become minority within that country, by miracle. It happened because there is history of colonization behind it. We continue to live on our own land where our peoples have lived for centuries before Russia came. It's our indigenous land. We're no minority. Also, in numerical sense, if you would like, there are 10 million Tatars living in this world. I think we're far from being a minority, 6 million in Russia. And I think the term indigenous is very important because it shows, it explains that it has a load, of brutality of Russian colonialism behind it. So that's why the term...
Could you explain it a little bit more? Why does that word carry that load?
Because, the term indigenous guarantees us certain rights by international law. And in fact, there is a reason why Russia refuses to call its quote-unquote minorities indigenous people. Russia has a very peculiar law.
So the official word within the Russian Federation
We're
is
minorities. We're minorities, except for a very small group of nations. So there are 180 different ethnic groups living in Russia. And only the smallest...
180.
180, yeah. Only the smallest one of them are called indigenous. Russian law defines that you need to be, I think, below 50,000 people remaining to be called indigenous.
You have to be almost,
almost dead. Yeah, almost extinct.
You use the word extinction?
Yeah, almost extinct, and then you are indigenous, Because, of course, with indigenuity, by international law, and especially speaking about the times when Russia still abided by some principles of international law, indigenous makes it harder to exploit these nations because, with the international legislation on indigenous people's rights come certain protections. For example, the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. So when you come to an indigenous land as an extractivist company, you have to obtain consent of those people.
Yeah, by the UN Charter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, if you come to, for example, Bashkortostan, where I'm from, could we go back into the map because it kind of shows,
Yep.
So I'm from Bashkortostan over there, very, very rich territory. It's the size of Hungary. It's 4 million of us. So Bashkorts and Tatars together are the Turkic majority. Our languages are mutually intelligible, so we kind of function at one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So of course, if you come to a land of Bashkorts, where there are millions of them, it's going to be a bit hard to obtain that free, prior, and informed consent, for a company from Moscow to come, and extract everything and bring out the natural resources. It's much easier in the Arctic now, particularly, where these indigenous communities, they're very small. There's 10,000 of them. You come to this land, you can easily manipulate this principle of free, prior, and informed consent, obtain it on paper, and explore the Arctic. Russia loves talking about exploration of the Arctic as if no one ever lived there before, or does right now, but Arctic is an indigenous land. And I think it's especially important for us to remember that and keep that in the back of the mind, because with Trump and Putin meeting right now, Arctic is again back on the agenda. US wants to come in and explore the Russian Arctic, and look out for my upcoming piece in the Moscow Times about that. But a little preview is, I've read so many foreign correspondents, writing about this big geopolitical game in the Russian Arctic and who's going to come in and how Russia is going to use the resources. None of them mentioned that there are people living there. There are indigenous people living there. There are indigenous people who try to, survive off of their traditional way of life. They cannot do it anymore because Russia pollutes the rivers. Russia accelerates climate change in the Arctic by absolutely ignoring any possible environmental standards, with its extractivist industries. It's indigenous lands, and it's lands of suffering. There is nothing great about exploring the Arctic, on the ground.
You explain very well the sort of international law aspect of it and the rights part of it between minorities and indigenous people. But if I listen carefully to you, indigenous also personally means as a sort of to you personally has a totally different load than minority, or it's a personal thing as well.
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Bashkortostan. I'm not really with Bashkorts together. We're not really a minority there. It's our land. And I don't think I even comprehended what it is to be, minority until you always go to Moscow for the first time, and then you're like, oh my God. That's what it means when you get stopped, in a metro for a documents check. My mom did, this dark-looking woman with 2 kids, suspicious. I always say that there is a time when you face the Russian world. When you live in a republic, you don't really feel that, especially not when I was growing up in the early 2000s, because we still had these vestiges of attempt at independence. So, we were learning Bashkir language at schools. There was still, quite a lot of indigenous groups that were able to kind of function and advocate for language rights, etc. So it was a very different world back then. And then when you go into Russia proper, especially Moscow, that's when you realize, oh, that's why they say minority about us, because on our own land we don't feel like that. In indigenous, it's also connection with the land. It means completely different thing. I'm often asked, why indigenous political prisoners, why we don't advocate for more of them, to be exchanged. In fact, for many indigenous political prisoners, they don't want to go abroad. It's very important for them. They stay on their land. They're imprisoned, but they are on their land with their people. And there is a very strong emotional bond, very strong emotional connection that, yeah, I think it's hard to verbalize at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're saying a lot of them don't even want to be exchanged to Berlin or Amsterdam or wherever. I would rather stay in prison.
Yeah, I'm sure it differs. You know, we should ask them, and I think that's what's absent right now. People rarely ask opinions of indigenous people, but I know that for some of them, it's a matter of principle to be at home, to be with their own people. And you know, in Bashkortostan, we have the largest political case in Russian history right now, with more than 80 people imprisoned for participating in a peaceful protest last year, you know, I don't want to speak for those people, but I know the sentiment, you know, it's that we're all one in this. It's, you know, half of my republic, well, an exaggeration, but, you know, is in prison. And it's very important to remain with the people, to stay there.
I see you nodding, both of you. That experience of going to metropolitan Russian or Russia proper, is that something, because I saw you both recognizing this, that could you describe that a little bit for us, Vladimir?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my first experience in Moscow was when my parents decided to move from Tashkent, which is capital of Uzbekistan, to Russia. And I actually said, you know, I've seen this imperialist and nationalist movement, marches, they gather a lot of people, and I don't really want to go to Russia. And they were like, you don't have any chance to say. So you're 17, you're still underage, or what is the term?
Yeah,
so,
underage.
You're going with us, you're coming with us. And I was like, all right, then we're going to Moscow. And we did it, and I actually regretted, like, right away. It was like 2011, so we landed in Moscow, then checked to our hotel, and then I went to walk, just because I wanted to see the Stalin's high-rises, and I was like, why not? I want to see them. So I went outside, and my cell phone actually died. So I tried to ask the directions from people, and all I saw is just blind eyes, and they never stopped or even recognized me. So I was like, excuse me. And I wasn't speaking Uzbek because I'm a native Russian speaker from my my childhood. It's my only language, actually, was back then.
You speak Russian with your parents?
Yeah, even with my parents, because I'm Korean, I'm not Uzbek. But I could understand Uzbek anyway. But no, it's not the case. So I wasn't even speaking like with accent or something, so I was very fluent. And still, nobody stopped, and nobody even like take a look at me. And I was like, I'm feeling like I'm a piece of crap. I'm sorry for my language, but I'm alone in this huge, humongous city. So I just found the direction myself. But it was my first experience. And actually, close to the war, so then I was like living in Siberia, so it was like far away from Moscow. But then I met my husband, and I decided to show him. He was born in Russia, actually, in Novosibirsk. And he'd never been like to European part of Russia or any part. So we went to St. Petersburg and Moscow, and it was the really bad experience, to be honest, because when you come to Moscow, it was like, what, 2020, 21 probably, 21. So we came to Moscow the first time with him, and we
This was your husband's first time in European Russia?
Pardon?
This was your husband's first time
Yeah,
in
yeah,
European
right.
Russia.
It was
Yeah.
his first time, not
Yeah.
mine. So we went to Moscow subway, and there was a scene. It's like actually a day-to-day scene. It wasn't just a raid. It was like normality for Moscow to have policemen within each station who check everyone who is not looking like white person. And for me, it was like, why? You know, they might be immigrants, but as you see on the map, there is a huge variety of ethnics within the Russian Federation. So policemen, they cannot foresee, or I don't know, like be sure that the persons they stop, they are not indigenous to Russia, first of all. And second of all, it's like, it's just a normality for people from Moscow or Central Russia, because they sometimes even support these checks, you know, ID checks. And policemen, they never hide the reasons. For instance, in Novosibirsk, when I met my husband and I was leaving, I was stopped by police for ID check. Like every time I went outside of my home, no matter how good I dressed up, no matter how good my salary was, no matter what my position in the career path and stuff, I was always stopped by police. So whenever I saw policemen and I saw that they noticed me, I knew that they will approach me, and that was the case. And on my question, what is the reason for ID check? Can you please communicate it? Because according to the law, you're supposed to name it. And I knew the law, even though I'm not a lawyer, just because that was necessity for me. Just to, you know, somehow give them a pushback to make sure they probably next time they won't deal with some Asian looking or, I don't know, person of color that easily. So they won't just come to them that easily and say that, you know what, the ID check, the reason for ID check is just you are not Russian. And actually, in Russian language, we have the differences. I mean, we have Русский, which means Russian, and Россиянин. So how to explain it better, I don't know. So in Russian language, the country's name is Россия, not Russia, not Russia. I'm sorry. So they name everyone who is not looking white Россиянин by country name, but they treat Russian as an ethnicity in Russian language. So even though there is no such ethnic group, as far as I know. But anyway, so all white people are Russians and others are non-Russians. Or let's put it this way, Russian citizenship holders. Is it right?
Citizenship holders, yeah.
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 So, yeah.
Dordana, if this aspect of, because we're talking about imperialism, colonialism, this empire, would you say that because a known feature of Western colonialist endeavors, Dutch or English or American, is part of it is racism. By now we know that. You know, that it's for a huge part built on that notion.
Yeah.
But in Russian imperialism, you could say there, you know, now we heard different stories, of course, but
structural discrimination.
Yes,
it's called in political science like that because Leila was talking about her experience as born into Russian Federation and Sergei as a newcomer in Russian Federation. They both don't look like white Russians. It's called structural discrimination. And I would like to not share my own experience, doesn't matter, it's similar to, it's not best experiences. I would like to
It's
share...
similar, you would say, your personal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As a woman also, it's also quite harsh. Being woman and Asian in Russia is, yeah.
You would rather not go into that, is that what you said?
Yeah, I think so. And I would like to talk about like Russian, like Central Asian immigrants mostly, because as I said before, there is a hierarchy within Russia. Russian passport holders called Россияне, and ethnic Russians, white Russians called Russians. And that hierarchy is in mindset of people who are living there too, because it's studied at school too. It's just in the system, generally. And so funny, Leila said like there is 6 million Tatars living in Russia, Russian Federation, but more than 10 million working immigrants or gastarbeiters living from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, between 10 and 12 million actually. Why they come there? Of course, not from the best life, and even if we got freedom as Central Asian countries, we are not stable economically yet. And
would you agree that the ones who got away in the 90s, that they were lucky?
Oh no, we are better. Honestly, yeah? I will not. we can be easily ourselves. We can enjoy our language. We can be safe Muslims. Or wear traditional clothing, anything like that, and in your own country, it's actually nowadays, which I really respect, nobody likes speaking Russian so much. They rather speak English or speak one of the local languages, please. Yeah. A lot of people like...
Sorry to distract you because you were talking about immigrants, working immigrants to the...
Yeah, I would like to talk, there is a hierarchy and xenophobia, of course, and why they came there, and because of economical unstable situations in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, there are not so much to do, there are not so enough, because these countries were always monocultured, and in 35 years it's very difficult to make, and a lot of corruption. So Soviet regime didn't change, after Soviet regime didn't change the regimes itself, because mindset of the people stayed similar. Yeah, for example, if we talk in the numbers, 40% of domestic growth of Tajikistan comes from immigrants who are sending money home. So 100 euros earning there means a lot of money in Tajikistan. Between 50 and 25% of domestic growth for Kyrgyzstan. And for Uzbekistan, between 10 and 20. But it's also not official numbers. The official numbers can be quite high. Everyday policeman harassment. Everyday document checking. Just yesterday, I was just sharing today with you guys, and Ira also, was a, I don't know the singer, but there is a singer from Uzbekistan who came to entertain other Uzbek immigrants there, 500 people, in the concert hall. Police, OMONs came, just stopped the concert, checked everybody, 500 people, 8 people were sent back, deported without any court, without any judge. I don't know how many, but around 20 are detained, because probably they held 2 citizenships, which are used now against Ukraine war, easily. Do you want citizenship? Do you want prison? Do you want that? Do you want that? Or you should go there.
There is the Ukrainian front.
Yeah, they're used in the war. And Tajikistan, for example, is not even punishing people who are participating. Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan punishing. If you participate in the war, if you go back, you are put into the prison between 6 and 8 years, depending. And Tajikistan cannot, just economically, socially cannot. It's one of the poorest countries in Central Asia. It's landlocked.
What can they do not?
No, they will not punish if you go to the war as a Tajik passport holder.
But they couldn't because they're too dependent on the
Russian Federation, on the not only army, These countries also have a lot of debts, yeah, in front of Russia. These countries are landlocked, but two big economies like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan doing quite well because of natural resources, because of populations that grow quite a lot in the 35 years. And of course, what is not helping media stereotyping of these people, and which is always used as an instrument against also indigenous people in Putin's government, is saying they are foreigners, they are outsiders, they are uneducated, backward people, they are criminals, which makes Central Asian communities live in own neighborhoods. Which makes difficult to children of immigrants to go to schools, which is for me so double standard. Like, for example, if you're Belarusian or if you're Ukrainian and you came there with the children, you can immediately go to school because you are one brother country, one brother nationality, and Russian considered.
You're part of the Russian family of the nation.
Yeah, you're Slavic.
Ah, right.
You speak Russian very good. But Uzbek children, Tajik children, Kyrgyz children should pass very difficult Russian language tests. If they are not passing them, they are not entering the school, which means they are also staying years and years behind. And a lot of immigrants move there with their family, of course, because they don't work there only. There are part of them are seasonal workers in the construction, but a lot of them also hold 2 passports, 2 citizenships. And and everyday discrimination, structural discrimination, and doesn't matter how good you speak Russian, doesn't matter how good you look like, Vladimir, I'm sorry to say, but you will be checked, you will be deported, you will be judged, you will be sent to the war first. And all indigenous people also among was first to ask to go to the war, not the ethnic Russians.
Sometimes not even asked.
Yeah. And I would like also highlight, so lastly, psychological and cultural impact of these 10 million or 12 million immigrants. How difficult is that? I was very surprised when I moved to Netherlands. I live in Europe already 13 years, and Netherlands is not my first country, but I was first time surprised. Nobody asked about my accent. I speak Dutch with an accent. It will never go away. But nobody asked me that I don't speak normal Dutch or something like that. In Russia, it was normal, daily for me. Why you speak not normal language? Why you that? Why you are learning Russian if you are learning Russian?
This aspect you're touching upon, that minorities or indigenous people, or both of them, are actually drafted much more often, not even being asked. To what extent is actually the war fought and used as a pretext to maybe even Russify some of the many republics you're showing here?
Well, I can speak on that.
Yeah, for sure.
You can, please, yes.
I mean, we have quite an extensive data now. It's lagging behind, but on Russia's war casualties. And it gives us an idea of what mobilization, which it's been 3 years of mobilization this week, actually, the full scale, the partial military mobilization, which was not partial in the republics at all.
Which was not partial in the republics at all?
No, because we have documented evidence, of men literally grabbed from the streets and shoved into these, they're not even police vehicles, they're unmarked vehicles used by the military, shoved there and then brought to the conscription office. And we need to understand that when we're talking about republics, we're talking about lands extremely rich in natural resources, right? Russian oil, Russian war is not sponsored by the money coming out of, oil is not being pumped on the Red Square. It's being pumped in Bashkortostan, the Republic of Sakha, etc. That's where Russia's critical minerals are located, which are not sanctioned by the EU, may I add. They're still flowing over here. So these are territories extremely rich in natural resources. But for some reason, I wonder why, maybe colonialism, extremely poor. People there live in immense poverty. I was recently talking to people living in the Arctic part of the Republic of Sakha. Sakha is the size of India. And they were telling me that for them, eating expired food is a normality. There is no fresh food. No fresh food reaches Russia's northern regions. They spend all of their salary on food. They cannot travel, they cannot do anything. The only thing they can do is survive. So we need to, put ourselves in that mindset and understand that this is mobilization happening amid immense poverty, but also complete lack of access to legal help. When we're talking about mobilization in Central Russia, people can access lawyers, they can, go to court and say that they're not eligible for the draft for X, Y, and Z reason. People in ethnic republics cannot do that. They simply don't have access to lawyers who would agree to do that. Many of them also don't speak Russian well enough, and there are very few lawyers who speak indigenous languages and would take up a case like that. So that's why this partial mobilization was so easy in many of the republics, because you can just grab people off the streets. They cannot do anything. We had horrific accounts from the Republic of Buryatia, which is Buryats are continuously overrepresented among Russia's casualties. And when I say overrepresented, we are counting not against the total number of people, but we are on 10,000 people, how many casualties you have by each nationality. So in Buryatia, they would go into the villages, they would literally slam the doors of village houses and grab people out of their beds to send them to the front line. It was horrific. It prompted protests, which I want to highlight. It's not, indigenous people in Russia are not passive. The largest protests we have seen in Russia during wartime were happening in the republics. Sakha had the most impressive, I believe, act of anti-war resistance, because when the mobilization started, as men were grabbed off the streets, around 500 women came out in the capital Yakutsk, and they danced a traditional dance, and that's already, when saying no to war was outlawed in Russia, you could be fined and go to prison for that.
Actually, people do go to prison for that. Yeah.
They do. Yeah. And these women came out and they used their indigenous language to protest. They sang anti-war chants in Sakha, and then they were basically pleading for their men not to be drafted. Well, they were drafted anyway. Right now, by the total number of casualties, it's my native Bashkortostan and Tatarstan are the leaders in this countrywide tally. We have the most casualties in the war in Ukraine. But when we look, comparatively to, proportionally to the population numbers, then it would be North Asian, I don't like the term Siberia, republics, Buryatia, Sakha, Tiva. That's when we see most of the casualties. It's very small nations, and there are villages where there are no men left. It's only women. And most of those republics are also not urbanized. So it's village life, it's a very hard life, which completely depends on male labor. And honestly, now it's a question of survival. How will you survive without any men?
Would you say that, because we're talking from the Tsars to Putin, of course, now we arrived at Putin, but would you say that this Putinesque, which in Italian means a different thing, but ideology is back at Russification and glorifying the Russian nation in a sort of an imperialist way, and not allowing non-Russian ways of life, maybe LGBT plus and others too. Is that back, sort of a conscious ideology of Russification?
I mean, from my perspective, it's not back. It was there.
It was always there.
Yeah, I mean, I immigrated to Russia in 2011. It was already like glorifying Russians, like white Russians, and they even teach in schools, like at schools, you cannot read the history of conquest of Tatarstan, for instance,
No?
or anything. No. And actually, I was my educational background in Uzbekistan was that I was going to Russian-speaking schools always. So we were using the Russian Federation, books from Russian Federation, and the history books always was. It was always about either ancient Egypt, Greece, or ancient Russia, but not like entire Russia, only the European part, which called Rus. And I was actually like really impressed about it, and I was questioning myself from the childhood why they never speak about the casualties, let's say, in Second World War from Republic of Uzbekistan, or the input, from Uzbek people also. They contributed a lot of like resources, such as food, like weeds and what else? Cotton probably.
Cotton probably.
Yeah. And actually in Russian books, history books, they never mention it. They always were saying that Russians, made this victory possible. The Russians sacrificed a lot to actually conquer fascism. And when I moved to Russia, I've never seen like any acceptance at all, or any acknowledgement. The only question I had in Russia, and I can understand if some European would ask me that, but not Russians, because we share some history together. I mean, Republic of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, all Central Asian republics, they share a lot of history with current Russian Federation. And when I came to Russia, I was even questioned by a teacher, like, do you like it? And I was like living in a small town of Krasnoyarsk Krai. So she was like, do you like it here? And I was like, no, why? She was like, but it's better than Uzbekistan, right? You're still riding, what is the name of it? Donkeys. And I was like, are you for real? Are you for real? And she was actually the best teacher at this school. And I was so embarrassed that I speak Russian, that I know Russian history better than her, that I don't know, I was so embarrassed even to speak Russian, in general, that is my mother tongue, because I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not a part of Russian culture that you're trying to sell me, because what you're saying is just so bad. It's just, no, we don't ride donkeys in Uzbekistan. We ride Mercedes-Benz buses. And you riding some bullshit Soviet buses here. Yeah, I know it's fun. It sounds funny, but back then I was so stressed, because when the grown-up person who actually was born during the Soviet era asks something like that, for me it's just shocking, and that's the part of the life in Russia, part of the Russian imperialism. So it was like back in 2011.
So could we say that Russification is not a historical thing, but actually a thing which is official policy still?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we always forget, this is Putin's Russia, yes? But who was Putin's favorite hero? who he always wanted to be in history, as a Stalin. And if you ever read this great writer from Central Asia, my favorite Kyrgyz writer, Chingiz Aytmatov,
Was half Tatar, may I?
yeah, great to know. We will say that he's Central Asian. So I read all his books almost.
What's his name again?
Chingiz Aytmatov. And I would like, what is Leila talking? Like, yeah, Second World War, which glorifies, Putin glorifies it, Stalin glorified it. Yeah, of course they won it because there was 15 countries in one union, yes? It wasn't like only Russia, White Russians or something like that. But also, when you read his books, and he lived at that times, after, but still he writes books about from small villages of Kyrgyzstan and small, just simple people life, farmers and everything, and you can see how they were also sent to the war. It wasn't like, oh, I would like to fight, I would like tomorrow to die for you, Stalin. No, no. These small village schools didn't know who is Stalin or didn't speak maybe proper Russian at that times also. Because maybe for 100 children, there was one teacher who came, who didn't come to the class. But I would like to say that at that times also the first minorities, first ethnicity groups were sent to the war, which Putin is doing it also now. And no, I totally understand Russians themselves also. They are also sent to the war. But we have now reverse situation, which was very interesting to read, that a lot of Russians, ethnic Russians, or people from Russian Federation moved to Central Asia now. Because they are running away from the wars, they are running away from the system which they tolerated for many, many years. So they're living now in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan mostly, because Turkmenistan is close, Tajikistan quite a poor country. So they came and they lived there several years now. I can see it online. I met several activists also who is continuing activism there in Central Asia. But like when I made this joke now, why you don't speak the language? Like, it's not joke, but also was sarcasm in the same time, because that was expected from us, yes? That was expected from post-Soviet region, because it was a region.
So why don't you speak Uzbek?
Yeah, why you don't speak Uzbek? Why you don't speak Kazakh? Why you don't speak Kyrgyz? Why are you behaving a tourist here? You got your visa, you can stay here, you are safe. Why are you not respecting the culture? But the same feeling always had it also, even in my small village where I grew up, in Karakal, Pakistan. Third, fourth generation of Russian people, this mindset that they brought civilization towards stayed in generational in Russians, in our countries. They never accepted the culture, never learned the language, never learned the tradition. They always spoke Russian, which is now Uzbekistan is influencing also official language tests also to everybody. But even at Russian schools, you can learn languages. It always was extra class, extra curriculum. But that mindset, yes, that I would like to say how it became systematic, that mindset that we are better than you, we know better than you, it stayed almost in blood. Not only in Russian Federation, also in Russians who live in Central Asia for many years.
You're mentioning Stalin as an idol of Putin. He recently had a decree that Russia is going to celebrate 300 years of the anniversary of Catherine the Great. That's one of his other big examples, maybe, and Peter the Great, maybe even so. Is that significant for reinforcing the imperial colonial narrative? Is that the way he does that? Celebrating old monarchs?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's reinforcing this very particular version of history, right, where you erase everyone. You know, I've mentioned the conquest of Kazan, but for us, for Tatars, you know, it's something, of course, talked about in families, passed down through generations, etc. So it's a memory. But if you grow up outside of that environment, if you grow up in a more Russified community, chances are you don't even know when colonization of your people started, because you have no chance of reading about it anywhere in history books. It's even more complicated, with, for example, Bashkortostan, because there the history has been rewritten completely, that Bashkirs apparently just, came to Russians asking to join the empire. That's what I studied in history books, which I was like, that doesn't really add up, Also, given that at the same time, what I later learned, from independent sources, there were multiple uprisings against Russia in Bashkortostan. They were very violent, on both sides. There was enormous resistance because in Bashkortostan, Russia actually used very tried and tested settler colonial practices. I was born in a town that is called Blagoveshchensk. It's a Russian name. It was founded by Russians on the Bashkir land, and my family was one of the few Tatars to ever relocate there. Now, the ethnic composition is changing, but it's a fact, it's a very settler colonial way. So, of course, history plays a huge part in circling back to the reaction to my video when I talk about conquest of Kazan. It's shocking to learn about that, and it's uncomfortable to speak of it. I wanted to add, you talked about language and Russification. I think it comes hand in hand, when you look at Russian school curriculum, there's this version of history, but then it comes together with complete erasure of indigenous languages from it. So, in Bashkortostan and Tatarstan, in all republics, indigenous languages are by constitution second official languages of the republic. So,
second.
Yeah, so together with Russian. In fact, they're equal by constitution.
Equal.
It's
okay.
equal use.
Yeah.
It's equal use in most republics, with the exception of some. I will use the example of Tatarstan because we still have parliament proceedings in Tatar, and the head of Tatarstan, he speaks Russian with an accent, actually, very, very, distinct one, because he prefers using Tatar. But the problem is, starting this year, in those republics, children still study this official language of the republic. Russia first started erasing the number of hours from the curriculum in 2017, basically making it not mandatory, because before even Russian kids would have to study, official language of the republic. Since 2017, it became not mandatory. Okay, schools would keep it as extracurriculars, to still bring kids, still teach them the language. It was 2 hours a week to learn a completely different language. Most kids, even in Tatar families like we grow up speaking Russian. It's the dominant language. Your parents are really worried you'll speak with an accent and will be discriminated, so they choose Russian. So learning the language at school, it's basically one of the few ways of keeping it alive and well. Starting from this year, kids in elementary school will have only 1 hour of indigenous language. I don't know what you can learn in 1 hour of language a week, nothing. We see also that reflected in the official statistics. All indigenous languages, with the exception of Chechen, are on decline. Most languages are endangered. They will disappear. No one uses them anymore, and it's a very deliberate policy. It's erasing it from schools, it's erasing it from public life. There are very few, resources available. If you want to read news in Tatar, for example, it's mostly propaganda, which, I want to give shout out to Radio Free Europe, which does an enormously important job within Russia. They're the only news outlet that delivers independent news in Tatar language and in Chechen. These are 2 largest languages in Russia. So if you want to continue, speaking Tatar, if you want to keep the language alive, that's your only lifeline to, stay engaged and have political vocabulary. And, what will we have left if we don't have our language? what will be left of our identity? We survived, nearly 500 years as Tatars. I think it's still a miracle that we were colonized in 1552 and we still have a distinct indigenous identity and we still exist as a nation. But I think with the language literally dying, I'm not sure, what will happen. And it comes hand in hand also with the assault on religion, on Islam. And for us also, adopting Islam in 1992, we were the first peoples in the area to adopt Islam as an official religion, and that also was a big part of saving our identity all throughout the Soviet Union. People would, my great-grandparents would pray 5 times a day, and despite all the restrictions imposed by Soviet Union, but that was part, of keeping your identity alive. Now we see, attacks on mosques in Russia. We see how, religion is being politicized. We see Kremlin-installed imams, rallying people to go to war, etc., etc. So language, religion, this kind of pillars of identity are being attacked. And right now, we can talk how it's Putin's politics, etc. But I think for indigenous people, it's a matter of survival. And I'm afraid, what we're witnessing is, we say 10 million Tatars. I mean, I'm not sure how much longer we will exist.
Very sad to hear.
I think, as we always do, it's about time to see whether there's people in the audience who want to join in. It's a sad moment in our conversation to do so, but I'm afraid it is a rather horrible topic. You mentioned Radio Free Europe, of course, as a lifeline for languages in these autonomous regions, which had just had its budget cut in half by Trump because he cut US aid to Radio Free Europe. So there's hand in hand all sorts of imperialist notions trying to end indigenous peoples on both sides of in both empires. Yes, I saw your hand. You raised your hand. I'm coming towards you with the microphone so people at home can actually hear what you're saying. I will hold the microphone for you. Yeah.
Okay, like that. Okay, thank you very much. And I'm very also thankful to Durdana to mention the idea of ethnicities in the Soviet, it's actually the Soviet Union created hierarchy, right? You have the Slavic group, you have South Caucasus, then you have Central Asia, and then you have everyone else, which is currently autonomous and republics in Russia, right? You name it, like Tatars, Bashkirs, and so on. But I would maybe give a small comment that it still exists. Yeah. And it exists outside Russia. And it exists in, I'm really happy that you've had an experience where you've never been questioned about your accent.
Yeah.
I had questions such as, why your English is so good in Kazakhstan? In 2020-something, I still get those questions.
Oh, I'm sorry for your experience.
And I'm not the only one. And I do get it from fellow former Soviet people from former Soviet republics. I will try to be politically correct, not to mention which. I'll tell you later after, but in the audience maybe it's not very respectful. I would love to know. I'll tell you. But I have a question, maybe it's more for Leila, but for everyone else, about mainstream Russian opposition. Do you see them confessing colonialism, Russian colonialism, Soviet colonialism, or do they already do that? That Soviet Union was a colonial empire? And do you see that coming in the next few years from what you see these days?
No and no. I will be very quick with that. We discussed it. I've written multiple interesting opinion pieces on that, in fact, in Moscow Times also, if you want to read about my experience in these events, forums, put up by the Russian opposition or for the Russian opposition by European allies, trying to build bridges, inviting indigenous people there. I think we keep coming back to this idea of education, right? And I think you probably will relate. I think all the nations living in the Soviet Union who were lower in that hierarchy, there's this obsession with good education always. I mean, in my family at least there was, because you have to be good, you have to be better. Because that way, they will let you in the room with them, and, then you will be equal. Well, I went as far as to get, degrees from top 10 universities in this world. And when I got into the room with the Russian opposition, I was still treated the same. I had, a fellow colleague, a sociologist, lecturing me on, social opinions in Bashkortostan, where he's been for a week in 2008. And he kept telling me what the life there is like, And these are respected people, quoted in major news outlets, invited to big European forums, etc. And behind closed doors, they still treat you as a lower class citizen, no matter who you are. I personally, I think it's called generative refusal. I think indigenous people it's not our job to educate Russians, the dominant majority, on colonialism. They have resources, they clearly don't have the will. I think it's our job to work on behalf of our communities and help them advance and protect them and fight for their rights. For me, it's doing great journalism and hoping to inspire more indigenous journalists by example, because there are very few of us right now. I just don't see the will. I don't see any desire to acknowledge anything, to admit to any, historical mistakes. I understand, that there is always this say, but you need to keep talking, you need to keep educating these people. But I think for indigenous persons, it's too much of an emotional toll to keep doing that. So I personally don't encourage that, and I don't want to engage in it.
I see many more questions, but there's a lady over here. I will hold it for you. Yeah.
Okay. So I would just like to start with a small comment on the difficulty of enforcing the indigenous rights. So, for example, under the international law, indigenous people are defined as having traditional lifestyle and also having traditional relationship with their forest, fisheries, and territories. And so, therefore, on some occasions, like looking at how the development of Tatarstan and Bashkortostan is looking in Russia, so it can also be that this particular definition may not exactly work. Plus, also to comment that, unfortunately, it's only a declaration. So basically, the states, that just shows the willingness or lack of willingness of the states in the world to actually recognize and protect these rights. That's just a comment on this part. Mm-hmm. Yep. And actually, I have a question to Dordana, triggered by the comment on Paranjas. So I'm now...
Sorry, on what?
Paranja.
Mm-hmm. Paranja, yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Because now, maybe because of my interest in human rights, I'm getting pushed these videos from different Central Asian republics about how the state essentially bans the practice of allowing men to be legally married to several women, which is a custom under basically the religion and religious practice. Mm-hmm. And then how women who still are convinced to opt for this option, which is not legally recognized, then can be left without any rights. And so there were very many female lawyers and activists who talk about this practice. And then another example is now also a lot of female activists talking about the practices in Iran, and also part of the resistance movement. The symbol of it is basically this, how women are forced to cover themselves completely. And they talk about the fact, well, one day in time before Islam came to our land, we were actually Zoroastrian and we had a completely different cultural identity. Yeah. And that's what's now happening to us. So my question to you is basically, how far in time does it make sense to go back to uncover colonial legacy? Like, how do you make a judgment how far in time you want to go back to?
Yeah.
And the second question is, like, how do you make a judgment about what is basically detrimental and what is beneficial to you today in terms of your cultural heritage?
Yeah. Oh, great question.
Could I just add a correction? There is no set definition of indigenous people in international law, if you look. Yeah, so traditional lifestyle is, well, if you want to comply, with Russian definition, then yes. But no, there is no set definition, and self-identification is the primary reason to be called indigenous. So I just want to correct you on that.
Well, actually, I was working on the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples, and basically some self-identified peoples, such as Breton people of France, were actually expelled. And yes, there is no definition, you're absolutely right. I'm just commenting on the fact that there are characteristics mentioned, such as traditional lifestyle and connection to forestries, fisheries, and territories. And I'm just saying that basically you definitely talk about ethnic identity, but that indigenous identity just may be hard case to prove under the international law. That's just it, to clarify.
It has been proven by indigenous activists from Russia already, so I think that job is done. So.
Oh, great questions. Thank you very much. And I'm quite, I'm a women's rights activist, especially in Central Asia. This question about women's rights is quite sensitive still. It was sensitive also before Soviet Union, before even that. Yeah, you're right. And mostly the nationality or ethnic groups who lived there were nomadic, and we didn't have that paranja or covering before Islam came. But we know, there were Arabic people came, Turkish people came, a lot of we were under many types of kingdoms, and that influenced our appearances, our language. We speak Turkic language. We have religion from Arab. We always make joke about that, how some people look quite white in Central Asia, how some people look Mongoloid, some people look quite brown. So it's a lot of mixing going on. And actually, I will say from the point of Uzbekistan, because I know it better. But the best women's rights activism going on in Kyrgyzstan, still in Kyrgyzstan, still the huge big groups who are fighting online, who are fighting in real, and they always do Women's Day demonstrations. Only they are allowed. In Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan, it's not allowed still. And about having, by the law in Uzbekistan, you cannot have more than one official wife. But of course, because as men in every country, they use religion as an instrument against women, and they get a second wife through mosques, paying underneath, because mosques shouldn't also work like that, shouldn't marry children also. They know the laws, but corruption, you know the people, etc. It's cultural also, and it's also part of culture, corruption. And so it puts a second, third wife in vulnerable position, even if they have 10 or 20 children, because they don't have any documentation, official documentation, they cannot get nothing from the men. And which puts men in quite good position, yes? And from jumping from one woman to another, abusing one, moving to another one. But thanks God, recently there was huge news, maybe you read, in Kazakhstan about domestic abuse. It was all internationally shown. Also in Uzbekistan every day, there is, we have a group which called Don't Be Silent, something like that. I know name in Russian only. So, which started in Russian Federation actually, then became part of Central Asian countries also, which this movement or community speaks also local languages now, make a lot of things. And first time ever in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan, you can actually get prison for domestic abuse, which is not still in Russian Federation, but they were first countries in Central Asia that made it through. And about the second question about that, before Islam, women were more, there are different views on that, and different books were written. Of course, Soviet Union happened, which totally reshaped and rewrite the story. But as nomadic, I always say I'm nomadic, I have that blood. Women were quite strong. Even like when we lived in yurts, we had huge jewelries when you see the photos, which we carried actually small knives. It looked huge, but we carried because anytime other nomads can attack us. But about education and stuff, of course, it's during the Persia, there was quite equal rights, as I read from storybooks, which was written in English, not in Russian or other languages, that women in Persia, which was Central Asia in the past, were quite educated. There were a lot of poesy in Russian among women, but I hope there will be more changes, and the word feminism will not frighten Central Asian women, because when they hear feminism, they associate it with naked women, which they saw in mass media, and which I see also in the traditional mindset of governmental channels in Uzbekistan also, that it makes you gay, or feminist, it's like will abandon the children. It's still used in governmental medium, but I'm grateful the new generation has access to many, many languages, to many, many more materials to read it online. And we are making progress, but it's still slow.
I'm looking for two last questions. I'm going to ask both of you to ask your question and then get back to, there's a glass of wine. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you. Shall I hold it myself?
Yeah, I will hold it.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this wonderful and interesting evening. My question mostly entails towards the use of the word colonialism when it applies to Russia and its previous forms and its potential future forms, shivers. Of course, it has it has a lot of the traits of that colonialism entails: a certain savior complex, be it through Christianity or through socialism, ethnic relationships, exploitation, settler colonialism, the overcoming of some physical boundaries, yada yada. But one of the crucial differences, which is through the colonial theory as it is understood in the West, which is, pun intended, oriented towards the global South, is the relationship between serfdom and local exploitation. So, for example, and generally speaking, in the West, the colonial expansion correlated directly with the abolition of serfdom, whilst as you yourself named Ivan the Terrible as the first colonial ruler of Eurasia, basically, he introduced the Russian serfdom himself at a time where in the West it was abolished. And I was wondering how these two concepts can be married, where it is at one time were both a tool for the oppression of the ethnic superiority of the superior ethnicity, and a tool for the oppression of the colonial minority or colonial indigenous peoples.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And whether the word or the concept of
whether the concept of colonialism is so directly applicable because of this
the differences,
because of the different relationships between the colonialist and the colonial.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can I go to you and then go back to the...
Maybe just to end, it would be nice to hear where you think there is potential moving forward that say with indigenous groups finding each other within networks and outside of Russia with other indigenous groups, and whether there's opportunities there for support or funding or visibility, and maybe we could leave on that note of kind of optimism around where we might support that effort.
I'm so happy with your question, because now I don't have to do that at the end, but that's wonderful. Yeah, both of you, but by the way, but that's also a great question.
I would like to mention Eric is actually environmental researcher and activist in Russian Federation. He works in climate change, environment, and also with indigenous people.
To whom can I direct this rather academic question of whether this is the right concept because of the introduction of lijfeigenschap, slavery, towards the Russian in Russian Empire in general?
I think it's supposed to be Layla because it's about.
But I'm not a historian. And you see, that's my problem with academia. It's moving so slow. It can't even update a definition of colonialism, so I have to like think about Russian serfdom. I don't know.
Yeah.
You're perfectly allowed to say I don't know. Of course, you're perfectly allowed to ask
because
questions.
I think that's the problem. It's the same thing. You know, we are burying ourselves in this. The colonialism must look like this. Here's how it looks. It's very different.
Exactly. Yeah.
And clearly, I think the academic knowledge is behind. Frank, I don't know, I'm a political scientist by training. We concern ourselves with the present, so serfdom is not really, do you want to talk about
yeah,
serfdom?
actually, we started like that this evening also. It doesn't look like British imperialism or like Dutch even. Look back. I don't know if you're Dutch, it doesn't matter. Like, I would like to say like, it wasn't about going to Africa and bringing black people and serving. Russia find own way. Even when he came, like this Tsar, first Tsar, Nikolai first sent the people to Central Asia. How? By sending translators, by sending presents, finding this soft way, being sensitive, do you know, like respecting it, respecting culture, and then introducing to, do you want to be equal to or you don't need a king? That's why, I think that's why it makes it tricky, and a lot of people maybe from Russia actually get very annoyed by colonialism or calling it colonial because they say, oh, we were one union. But what kind of roles we had in that union never was. It was beautiful picture of 15 countries, 15 beautiful different traditional clothing. Even you can see that even in Berlin when you go. Like there is a huge soldat. My husband was actually shocked to see it in Europe, not in Russia or not in Uzbekistan, where they put this huge, beautiful picture in Uzbeks in national costume, Tatars, they are all dancing around the fire, around the peace, but it was the only image. What happened inside of country, the minorities or the indigenous people were never asked. They are still not asked.
You know, I want to say maybe a very harsh thing, but I think we can theorize all we want, but refusal to see Russian colonialism brought war on the doorsteps of Europe.
Exactly.
And we can theorize about serfdom, this and that, but Russia is capturing Ukrainian territory right this minute. And it's all too familiar to indigenous people living in Russia, to people who lived in Central Asia. We know how Russia does it. It's the same playbook. So I think while we can theorize all we want and be like, no, this is not colonial, and what is it then? I don't know. But there is an active warfare. Europe ignored it in Chechnya, you know, saying that cannot be colonialism, it's Russian territory. It ignored it in Georgia. Look at Abkhazia and Ossetia,
Armenia,
what's happening right
Azerbaijan,
now.
it was ignored all the time.
Russia withdrew borders in Central Asia to stir conflict.
Still have some military in border with Tajikistan. Also said, officials actually said that we should take part of Kazakhstan because it's Russian-speaking part. It was Russia in the past. Such kind of things, officials from government actually working every day with Putin saying just to media, just to trigger people, just to, I don't know, to get attention.
I think you have answered both of you quite a lot of answering of that question, which it clarifies actually also quite a lot.
But there wasn't not slave. I mean, we didn't have slavery, but we had a lot of enforced labor. Actually, at least my people. I'm Korean, and they immigrated during the empire to eastern part of Russia, to Primoria, and actually then Stalin sent them forcibly, deported them to Central Asia, and that's how I ended up in Central Asia. And after the deportation in 1937, during the Second World War, they actually used Korean males on some mining extractions and stuff forcibly, actually, because they assigned the label of
Enemy of the state?
Yeah, enemy of the state during the deportation. And they send them forcibly to work on mines and stuff. So it's not slavery, probably, by definition, but still.
And it's repeating itself. They are sending now North Koreans again to the war. There is actually footages and facts, not only like, and that I agree with Leila also. It's in the footstep, I think, how we can go further from that. We're sitting in Europe talking about it, which is great step, of course, first, but how European Union can react and etc.
Maybe we move to the last question, trying to draw to a close as well. Is there anything, maybe a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel? Is there something we could do, something Europe could do? Do we see some positive effects?
Absolutely, I think...
not to sugarcoat the whole thing, but maybe to be able to move on to a drink and talk.
When I think it's... when Ira and I were talking about this program, I said that it's very important for me to highlight that we're not passively dying, indigenous people. We're fighting. As I said, Russia's ethnic republics have seen the largest wartime protests, and its fight for against Russian extractivism, which is very brutal. Its fight for local self-governance, which Kremlin is destroying. There are protests, today in Buryatia, because Russia is trying to mine apatites which are important for fertilizer, also not sanctioned by the European Union. So I want to highlight that these protests we see in Russia's ethnic republics, they are important for Europe. Because, as I said, a lot of things mined in the republics right now, they're still imported into European Union, and they finance Russian invasion directly. Europe has not banned imports of critical minerals. We've seen Trump and Putin talking about that. In Bashkortostan, people are protesting extraction, sorry, the name of the mineral is escaping me right now, also not find fertilizer, not banned from import, etc., and etc. So every protest against illegal mining that is happening in Russia, it also concerns Europe, because if that mining is to go ahead, this dirty money will flow into European Union, it will finance Russian oligarchs, and it will prolong Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yeah. It is critical for Europe. Now, what can we do? We can support indigenous movements, and I wouldn't be here today without hundreds of brave colleagues who are working, inside Russia, but also in exile, who've established incredible indigenous movements that have, oh my God, the reach, that I think a lot of members of the Russian opposition would dream of having within those republics. Entire populations read them, they support them, they, support their appearances in major platforms. Like the UN mechanism on indigenous rights, where Russia's indigenous people, like Buryats, like Sakha, are constantly speaking, advocating for their rights, etc. There is Free Yakutia Foundation, Indigenous of Russia, there are Kalmyk diaspora foundations. There are news outlets like Asians of Russia from the republics, which deliver news, and advocate on behalf of their people in the republics. It's enormous work, and I also want to highlight that indigenous movements do not get any financial support. all financial flaws, all the support for democratic resistance goes to, I'm sorry, I don't want to, do ethnic divides, it goes to the ethnic Russian opposition. All of these projects have been running on completely volunteer basis since the beginning of the war. And it's literally millions of people reading them within Russia. That's the reach that, any news outlet can only dream of. And I think it's important. I'm so grateful to the Balie for doing this groundbreaking conversation, because we need a seat at the table. If for Russia to become a normal country, or, I don't know, some believe their states will be independent, maybe it, but for Russia, this landmass to not be threat to European Union, you need to support indigenous resistance. That's the only way to equality. That's the only way forward. Because, it's about liberation for everyone, and until indigenous people do not have their seat at the table, nothing good or normal or democratic will come out of that country. Because Russia's democracy needs to start in regions, or it will never happen at all.
Thank you very much. I think we're drawing to a close. I thank you very much for your open conversation. I do realize that it's a very personal one as well. So there's not only academic and political and geopolitical aspects of it, but it's deeply personal for the three of you. And I think we need to thank you for that for bringing this to the table, lived experiences and insights into geopolitical and academic aspects of it. So I think we thank you very much for sharing that with us from your position. I'd like to thank you as well for coming along and asking questions. It's very important. I think it's a very good idea to read the little booklet by Maxim Erestavi, a Ukrainian of Georgian descent, Russian Colonialism 101. It's amazing. You get indeed hundreds of examples of from genocides to Russification. It's revealing, I think. It's also revealing that there's no big Western study on this topic up until today. Maybe as a chairman, I usually don't step out of that role of a chairman, but maybe that question, I've studied exactly these imperialist questions, and I think I remember a conversation with Nino Haratischvili earlier this year, the Georgian novelist, and we came to the point here in this hall that there's something weird about not recognizing the Russian colonialism as Westerners, because it gives the impression that we Westerners are always so self-centered that we cannot imagine that we're not the best at it and also the worst. So this worst period of history is our worst period of history and not your worst period of history. Which I think, tells a lot about our academics and our, way of thinking, and we cannot step outside that narrative that we're superior in many ways. I'm sorry to say. I didn't mean to participate in this conversation. Please look at the artworks in the hall. There are several artworks made by a Dutch artist, Marjolein Boter en Brood, about Central Asian republics and the environment there. And I hope to see you back here at the Balie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.